Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Hectic and Eclectic, a not-so-traditional witchy podcast.
She's hectic. I'm eclectic.
For this week. Sometimes we switch.
I, of course, am Colby, the wandering fool.
And I am Taylor Lynn of Mugwort and Moonstone.
What up, witch?
Hey, hey!
Pew, 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 pew.
It's not like we didn't just spend the entire day together, but as always, I'm happy to have you on a microphone because I just love our banter.
Because it's easy breezy, beautiful.
You know it.
So what's up with this second episode, girl?
So today's episode is going to be about appropriation. And specifically, we're going to be going over a couple of things like sage and smudging. We're going to be talking about shamanism a little bit. And then one of your favorite subjects.
But I'm an empath.
And for those of you who can't see us right now, we are doing basically air quotes around that. We'll get into that more later. So, as we mentioned in our last episode, we're going to start doing the Stone of the Week, or the Stone of the Episode, since we'll be releasing bi-weekly. This week's stone, or this episode's stone, is blue aragonite. Blue aragonite is colloquially known as the bitchy stone.
The bitchy stone. What's colloquially? I can't even see
colloquially?
That. That's a $5 word right there.
It's a good Scrabble word, too. So colloquialisms are just regional sayings. Like,
okay. My lisp just won't let me say that word.
It's okay. I'll say it for us because I love saying it.
Say it one more time.
Colloquialism.
Okay,
so blue aragonite is a throat chakra stone. So blue aragonite restores and enhances your ability to communicate, and it aids in empathy. And Colby, you have a great story about using blue aragonite.
So here's the real deal, y'all. Imagine me, hangry, grumpy, hating things, and really it's because I'm just tired and my back hurts and it's been a day. And I'm doing a mindless task and just kind of being a douchebag. And the lovely and talented Linda walked up to me, and she put her hand down and opened it, and there was a blue aragonite flat. And I looked up at her, and I was like, I'm not being verbally abused. And she's like, no, but you're being verbally abusive. Huh. Cocked my head at her, took the point, took the flat, put it in my pocket. An hour later, I'm humming and singing, and all is right in the world. And she takes another look at me, and message was received.
Yes.
Blue aragonite, the elimination of douche stone.
It's also very helpful in families that have teenagers. I know I myself wasn't necessarily a super attitude-y teenager. I was a more depressive teenager, but I have seen several people come into the shop looking for this stone because they want it to give to their youngins for when they get a little bit uppity. So keep that in mind if you have teenagers in the house. Might be something good to look into. So another thing that we did is we pulled a card of the episode.
A card of the episode?
A card of the episode.
Oh my goodness.
And that card was the upright 10 of Cups, which is arguably one of the best cards in the deck, in my opinion.
Well, and it's also commonly referred to as the white picket fence card.
There you go.
When everything's just good and in alignment and happy.
With the 10 of Cups, you're looking at your cup floweth over. It's a card that can symbolize ultimate prosperity when it comes to career, when it comes to money, when it comes to relationships, all of that. And in the deck that I'm working with, which is called the Crow Tarot, it was created by M.J. Cullinane, Cullinane. It's beautiful, beautiful artwork. You have, obviously, the 10 of Cups. You have two different pairings of crows. You have poppies. You have basically
we
the
like
card.
Poppies.
Yeah. The card crowned by a mockingbird. If you guys have a chance to look at this deck, it's absolutely beautiful.
So there's an interesting progression.
Okay.
So the 9 of Cups is kind of known as the wishes granted card.
Right.
Like your petitions have been heard.
Right.
And the 10 of Cups is the result of those petitions being heard. It is the end of that beautiful journey.
Right.
until it's reversed.
And when it's reversed?
Woo, girl. The Ten of Cups reversed is just so polar opposite is discontent. It's the winter of my discontent. It is just, it calls out what is wrong. So if you're looking at the Ten of Cups and seeing what's surrounding it, when it's in reverse, you will find the cause of that sorrow.
Okay.
Essentially, in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good to know.
Rock and roll.
Yep. So when we start this next section off, we're going to be talking about a couple of definitions, things like that, a little bit of table talk, so to speak, because I just want to make sure that when we start, we both are starting on the same page, because I am a millennial.
And I am not.
Yes. I have been surrounded on social media pretty much from high school on with this idea of cultural appropriation. And so if we actually look at the definitions, appropriation is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. And they also have a definition for cultural appropriation, which is an unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another society, typically a more dominant people or society. So it's this idea of taking something that doesn't belong to your culture and adopting it typically for profit or aesthetics or something that's really unmeaningful and taking it as your own.
So then, okay, how does that fall into one's spiritual practice?
Right. So the biggest thing is this idea of saging versus smudging versus cleansing. The idea that smudging is a bad word. Just to give a couple other examples of what cultural appropriation can be, it's things like dreadlocks, Indian headdresses, tribal tattoos, turbans. It can even go as far as white people who know nothing about Latinx culture dressing up as sugar skulls. Basically, the biggest thing that I've seen is this whole debate around smudging.
Which blows my mind.
Sure. So just to give you some of the data, I did a bunch of research in preparation for this episode as well, because it's something that I'm pretty familiar with, but I just wanted to make sure that I had my facts straight. So
thank goodness one of us is doing something.
I mean, I'm a research bug anyway. So basically what the whole issue is that New Age witches, New Age spirituality, and white people are taking this very sacred idea of taking white ceremonial sage, taking an abalone shell, and taking feathers and cleansing a space when they have no idea about the culture that this comes from. And they're just adopting it without paying respects to the people who created this custom and that created this practice. That is honestly the sort of the fulcrum, the whole point of this whole debate. And, there are people who, I've read accounts online of American Indian, Native American people, or First Nations people, if you're from Canada, who say that they're happy, that their custom is being adopted by other people because they think that it's so beneficial. And you have accounts of people who say, when I delved into this culture and I was learning about them or working with them or whatever, this was one of the things that they freely gave me. They freely gave me this information. But then you have other people who sort of took this idea and ran with it. And I think from what I've read, a lot of the issue is with large companies like Anthropology or Urban Outfitters, basically creating and profiting off of these quote unquote cleansing kits that have your white sage and your shell and your feathers in them. And they sell these things as a kit for like $12. And there's no information of where this comes from. It doesn't give any sort of background on where this comes from as far as culturally, what the connections are and what the connotations are. And I know that Anthropology pulled the kit almost immediately as it got called out, on social media. But then there are other companies, Amazon, Walmart, places like that, where they sell these things without any sort of other documentation to help people understand where it comes from. That is basically the whole kind of backstory on like where this is.
Okay. So, I am a mutt. I am mostly European. I'm a gay white man. I am an eclectic witch. I do not identify as shaman or shamanistic
Right.
in any way, shape, or form, even though I do practice animal medicine.
Sure.
But I do not identify as shaman. The thing that gets me is, and not just with sage, there are other topics, where other white people are chastising me, even though I have my sage, I have my Palo Santo, I have my abalone shell, I have my cauldron, I have my smudge fan that I made myself.
Right.
And I use these on a regular basis.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just me, the sage, and dragon's breath. I saged while you were out getting us dinner.
Right.
And lighting my candles and getting the space comfy through energetic cleansing and shifting. So is this cultural appropriation because of what I am not or do not identify as, but still using those tools?
No, at least in my understanding of cultural appropriation, I'm sure that there are people, Native American people or white people or whoever, that will say, yes, you should not be using sage. You should not be using an abalone shell. You should not be using, a smudge fan. But in my opinion, you are versed enough in where this comes from, what each item is supposed to do, and you are educated on the background of this practice enough to not go willy-nilly fucking cleansing,
right,
places, or offering the service of ceremonial smudging, going in and making a big show of, oh, I have my fan and I have my shell and I have my sage. This is a personal practice for you. And in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinion, that's totally fine. Where it crosses the line is when people take that and disregard where it comes from and use it for their own means.
So this leads into a really great area.
Uh-huh.
So I have been doing cleansings for years. And when I go to a home or an establishment and there is services exchanged, I'm doing exactly what I do at home.
Okay.
But there are still people who are chastising. This is one area.
Yeah.
Now, specifically with white ceremonial sage and the act of smudging, I have built a personal relationship. And I talk about personal relationship all the time.
Right.
I have built a personal relationship with this herb. My connection to it's a connection to the earth and the intentions that I set while working with this herb.
Right.
And I have a deep love for sage. I immediately will introduce people to the act of smudging, the importance of it, its benefits.
Right.
And talk very passionately about it. And the reason why I'm saying that, to just kind of jump to another quick topic, because I've had some issues here.
Okay.
Other practices from other magical, spiritual religions that I'm not a part of, but I have an affinity and respect toward, like hoodoo. I am all about embracing a word and bringing love into it. With being a 41-year-old homosexual, I say very colorful things.
Sure.
This is in no way, shape, or form put out there to offend. I find the word, the idea, and the imagery of gypsy absolutely beautiful. And I have been called out hard because of that.
Well, do you know why that is?
Why don't you let us know why?
Okay, so gypsy is a term that I have a lot of familiarity with. It's never necessarily been a part of my vocabulary when it comes to my practice or my aesthetics or anything like that. But the idea is that the word gypsy is actually a slur. It's a slur against Romani people who had this practice of being mobile and moving, and they are some of the sort of quintessential cunning folk. They were fortune tellers, and they were people that routinely got run out of town when all they were trying to do was make a living for themselves. And sure, there were people who did questionable things and all of that, but the term itself is very derogatory, and when it's freely tossed about talking about gypsy life or I'm a gypsy woman or whatever, it's not acknowledging the baggage that's connected to. And the difference, I think, is when you understand where it comes from, it's in my opinion not on the same level, but it's similar to people who use the N-word.
Right.
You might grow up, around, Black people and, any person of color and blah, blah, blah. And you feel sort of entitled to this word. But frankly, it's the majority of the time in the word's history, it's a derogatory slur against Romani people is, the term gypsy. So it's glorified in a lot of ways that it takes away from the historical importance of what this meant for a lot of people. Right. And, there were people who got labeled as gypsies, and, it completely changed their relationship in a community, even if that wasn't actually, even if they weren't Romani people, it still became this umbrella term of these undesirables.
Right.
And that is a lot of where the issue lies, is that, people don't necessarily know or acknowledge the fact that there were people whose lives were hurt. There were people who had very detrimental effects from this specific term. Again, I feel like at this point, it's something that people should know. They should know the history of the term. Right. And they should know the things that the Romani people had to deal with, because I think sometimes that does change someone's vocabulary is when you go, oh, now I understand the whole backstory behind this. And when you see these, wood paintings of, oh, I'm just, a gypsy, blah, 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 it dumbs the term down almost.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate, I know the reality, I really do, but the imagery that invokes in me with the word gypsy is something of great beauty.
To sort of jump back real quick, one of the things that I wanted to talk about as far as sage goes, yes, specifically white sage, is I've been seeing a lot of things online about white sage being endangered. And that white ceremonial sage, you shouldn't use it specifically because it's becoming endangered. And I'm a person who deals in facts. And this just simply is not the case. So sage specifically is called Salvia apiana. That's the Latin term for it. This is the type of sage that I'm talking about. This is very common white sage. White sage is one of those things that you can find pretty much everywhere. You can find it at Walmart, you can find it at New Age shops, you can find it pretty much everywhere. Part of the issue with, I guess let me preface this by saying that white sage is not on the threatened species list. It's not on the endangered species list. In my research, I really dug in to find what the issue was and why people were calling this endangered. And it actually has nothing to do with the number of plants that are actually in the world. The issue is with what's called wild harvesting. And that is this idea that Native American people would use this as a medicinal herb. They would go out and they would harvest this. And when it all of a sudden became popular, there weren't really places that there weren't farms where you could go and you could get white sage. And so what people started doing is they started going into these protected areas and just slashing and bringing home pounds and hundreds of pounds of this white sage. And people don't know that there are actually laws against, you know, taking things that are not on your property, even if they're on public property. You actually have to have a permit to wild harvest. Where sage is, where it's typically found, is in California. So it's kind of on the edge of the Mojave Desert. So it's not a necessarily super patrolled area. So it's hard to track when people are going in and taking this resource. Part of what you can do to be, you know, a responsible witch is buy small, buy it from someone who has their own white sage plant and just, you know, bundles what they have. Try to find someone who's sustainable and really dig in and find that sustainability is actually legitimate, because there are a lot of people who will say, oh, our sage is sustainably harvest, but they actually don't know where it comes from, or they just buy it in these giant lots and they go, oh, they have plenty of sage, it must be fine. But the main point is that people don't know where this is coming from, and people could be taking the natural resource that isn't necessarily sustainable, you know, taking it from the wild and making a profit off of it. And I think that that's where a lot of the issue lies. The one thing that I did find that was really interesting is when I was doing the research on this, it was that abalone shells are actually getting to be harder and harder to find. So in the US right now, it's illegal to harvest abalone shells. So when any store gets stock of abalone shells, typically they're imported from Mexico. And the shell is in such high demand that the shells are actually becoming harder to find. And there is a risk of potentially, going towards being threatened by it.
I know that the last few years at Enchanted Earth, we only get the abalone shell in a few times a year because it is getting harder. Now, we talked about it earlier today. The wholesalers, their sage will get backstocked. And what is speculated is that they're the ones saying that it's being overharvested. So that's a curious thing there.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, sage will be back ordered for weeks to a couple of months sometimes.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. And something that everyone should realize is that sage is great. Sage smells super yummy and it creates good smoke and everything else, but you can cleanse a space with any sort of smoke. You can do any blend of herbs. You can do, Palo Santo. There's a lot of things that you can do to cleanse a space. It doesn't have to be sage. You can use blue sage. You can use kitchen sage. You can use lavender. You can use mugwort. Mm-hmm. Pretty much anything that will burn will have a similar effect. And it might not have that antimicrobial effect that white sage does, but you can still use it in a very similar manner. And, you can even ring bells or chimes or clap or sing or whatever if you're looking at a way to cleanse a space, but you don't either don't have or don't want to use sage.
So then, as a spiritual advisor or spiritual counselor, whatever you want to call us, should we not be telling people to practice with sage anymore?
In my opinion, no. Or I should say, in my opinion, I don't think that we would have to tell somebody that. I think that the importance is more on education and telling people where it comes from, where the whole idea of the ceremonial smudging comes from, and also giving people other options. And I know, like, at the shop, we have white sage, we have blue sage, we have sage and dragon's blood, we have sage and rosemary. There are a ton of different options. So I think it's more important, rather than deterring, just educating and just taking that opportunity to really have, not necessarily a one-on-one super in-depth conversation, but going, just so you know, smudging is traditionally blah, blah, blah. This is what it is. This is how you would do it, blah, blah, blah. It comes from these people. That way, when they start out, it's not just, oh, I learned this from the witchy store. It's, the spiritual advisor at Enchanted Earth told me that this is where it comes from, and these are the other things that I can do as well.
Okay.
At least that's my opinion on it.
Right. Appropriation in magic and in spirituality and just that whole element is very weird for me.
Sure, I get it.
You telling what is the most appropriate way to approach saging and talking with a client, like, that's true. It is. You're right. But I have these horrible flashbacks to working at Starbucks and having a full list of how to correctly speak to someone.
Sure.
I don't want to be a robot.
I
I don't want to be an asshole.
Sure.
But I don't want to be a robot. And there are things I'm just so deeply passionate toward because of, again, the relationships I've built with these elements. It's hard.
I get it.
And the grief or the getting corrected, not for nothing, always comes from other white people. And that's where I begin to roll my eyes. But that's, I believe, a generational thing. You know, I'm not that much older than you, but I am Gen X, or if you want to consider Zillennial, born in 78, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I may have said something about this in the first podcast. Maybe not, I've just said it so much. Growing up out and proud to be a homosexual in the late 90s, when this peaked and we for the first time were feeling safe, being brought up in the gay community by the generation before me, who are just cutthroat and spoke at how it was, and that's where the true shade came from.
Sure.
That cultural appropriation and so many other elements. I can't open my mouth without shocking a millennial. Maybe not you, because you're a dirty witch.
It's true.
But, oh my gosh, we could have a whole nother episode about me chatting with other gay male witches that were like 12 years younger than me. And seriously, every word out of my mouth was offensive. It wasn't racist or anything like that. It just showed the difference in age.
Right.
And I talk very openly about sex without flinching.
Sure.
Unless someone else is talking about sex and deals with a vagina. I love women. I really do. I do. Don't get me wrong.
Our favorite button to push with Colby is to tell him that we're
it's so wonderful. It's so absolutely wonderful. But what I'm getting at is I don't know what is right and what is wrong. And I've always judged what is right, what is wrong by if I have to question it.
Sure.
And the thing is that there's things coming out of my mouth I don't have to question.
Sure.
But, oh my goodness, there's no way to say any of this without offending someone. But someone who is highly educated on what is right and wrong.
Right.
And have them listen to me for 10 minutes.
Right.
And they're going to be purple.
Well, I think part of the difference between you and I is I definitely grew up online. You know, I
didn't have a computer or the internet until I was 22.
There you go. And, you know, we had a family computer when I was 8. You know, I had my first smartphone when I was 19 and just had access to all of this new information and this whole connectedness. And it was very easy sort of from the beginning. Well, maybe not from the beginning, because the early ages of the internet were horrible and everyone was offensive all the time. But I think that we're just
And it was impossible to watch porn.
You're telling me. I think part of where my viewpoint stems from is that I have so many backgrounds of people that I have become friends with that I got a lot of contradictory sort of things all at one time. And I have absolutely no problem changing my vocabulary, changing the way that I say something, you know, anything in regards to communication. Like, I'm pretty easy. There are things where I will not falter and I will not change my viewpoints. But when it comes to, and it doesn't, it's hard to explain because it doesn't necessarily come from a I want to appease everybody viewpoint. It's more a how can I be smarter in my interactions with people because I don't want to make someone feel othered. It's so easy these days to, like, even in passing, make someone feel so shitty about who they are and things that they can't help, like their sexual orientation, their gender identity, things like that, that I try my best to be very welcoming in the way that I communicate. And I'm not saying that you don't, because you're
Right.
one of the friendliest people that I know.
I've spent my life being othered.
I have too. Granted, as I get older, I'm realizing that I'm somewhat gender fluid. I don't necessarily consider myself cisgendered. Some days I don't consider myself a woman. You know, some days I don't want to go by any sort of
She's
name.
a woman.
But it's just kind of being brought up in this whole blossoming identity sort of thing that's happening right now. It makes it easier for me to adopt new language, and to me it doesn't matter if there's a better way to say things to make people more comfortable. Then it's so easy for me to just adopt it. That's just
So I put a friendly challenge out to everyone when it comes to the subject of appropriation just across the board. When you are in a conversation with someone and that button gets triggered, before you react, before you school them, before you educate them, listen to their tone, listen to how they're expressing themselves so that you can better have that interaction
right.
other than trying to put someone in their place. Because my perception, interesting perception, the mass majority of time, that's all that's happening,
Right.
is someone who wants to put someone else in their place.
For sure.
And that's just as negative.
I completely agree with you 100%. And that's why I think that that's one of the reasons why it's so easy for me to talk to other people about subjects like gender identity, you know, cultural appropriation, things that I am fairly well educated on, because I don't go in assuming that people have malice. I go in assuming that people just don't know. And if they want to know, you know, there are people who will never change their ways. There are people
Right.
who you can give them X, Y, and Z reason 100 times over and they just won't, they don't give a shit.
Right.
But if you have a person who just doesn't know, then the easiest way to educate them is to come at them in whatever similar tone that they have. If they're being playful about it, you be playful about it. It's just matching that same energy. But I agree, there are a lot of people, and even in my own experience, there are a lot of people who come super fucking aggro into the conversation, and all they want to do is make their point as forcefully as possible, because I guess that they just don't think that other people will change,
Right.
you know, if they don't. So
when it comes to communication and how I communicate, outside of the bubbly and charming and oddly odd person that I am, I also am very much this aspect of the Queen of Swords, who's just blunt and to the point.
right.
When it's common sense.
Sure.
Blunt and to the point when she knows what's up. The Queen of Swords has seen it all and is rarely surprised. And so when speaking to certain topics, that bluntness really comes through.
Sure.
And this is my way to segue into a reason for all of you to hate me, if you want. But I want to speak honestly on a bit of a subject.
Sure.
And also talk about the differences. I'm specifically talking to all of you out there who identify as empaths, and also talk about it in relation to empathy.
Yes.
Taylor, before I kick this off, can you give us that smart mind of yours on empathic versus empathy real quick?
Sure. So I'm not super educated in the definition of what empathy is, but if we think about it sort of logically, empathy is the ability to look at another person and go, I understand. You may not feel the same way, but you can look at a situation that someone is in and go, that sucks, or that's great, or whatever. It's being able to connect to someone aside from you on a personal level. And I feel like that's really all it comes down to is it's go into a situation or learn of a situation and fully understand how, if you were in that person's shoes, how you would feel, and not assuming the other person's emotions, but understanding them. Being empathic, at least the definition that I know of it, is someone who can read other people's emotions very easily. And there are people who, when they get very unshielded or ungrounded or whatever, they have this moment of, I can't do this, I'm an empath. I can't do crowds, I'm an empath. It's very cop-outy. It's at least in my opinion.
To be empathic is to be sensitive to the energies and the emotions that surround you. There are those who are emotionally empathic. There are those who are physically empathic.
Right.
And there are those, like myself, who are both.
Okay.
And it's common.
Sure.
Because guess what, guys? To be empathic is a human condition.
Very true.
To be empathic does not make you special.
Right.
Because guess what? So is Sally, and so is Amanda, and so is Brad. There are those who are more sensitive, absolutely. To be able to be clairvoyant, to have any psychic ability, to have strong intuition, to be magical, to be a healer, you must be empathic.
Right.
My perception, interesting perception.
No, I definitely agree with you.
You telling me that you're empathic, opening up a conversation with, you should know that I'm empathic, is not going to impress me. I don't care. I already know that you're empathic.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to know is, what are you doing with it?
Right.
Are you copping out?
Right.
Oh, I cannot handle drum circles because I'm too empathic. No, bitch, you just don't like drum circles.
Mm-hmm.
I can't be around Sarah right now because she's an extremely toxic place. So mote it be. But it's not just because you're empathic. It's because you are smart enough to recognize negativity and pull yourself from it.
Right.
We use the term empathic but I'm an empath too much as an excuse.
Right.
What are you going to do with it?
Right.
Are you grounding, or are you walking around wearing Herkimer and Moldavite and Moonstone and Apophyllite dripping in metaphysical ice? Where's your grounding, bitch?
Yeah.
Where's your grounding?
So I just have to say, and I know
Oh
Colby saw this, but I just rolled my eyes almost hard enough to give myself a stroke.
It was beautiful.
So we, as practitioners, as readers that work in a metaphysical shop, this is one of the things that we see on a very, very regular basis. It's people who come in and they go, I can't handle my work environment because everyone is horrible and I just feel all their emotions all the time, blah,
And
blah,
so
blah.
mote it be.
Right. But what is the one thing that we tell them to do?
Are you grounding?
Right.
Do you know how to ground?
What stones do you have?
What you got in your bra, girl? What you got in your bra? We must learn, and again, this is based off of what has been successful for me. We must learn how to coexist with the energetic body and understand the ebb and flow. When we are going through personal transitions, further awakening and enlightenment, our empathic bodies are going to amplify and we are going to be more sensitive. We are going to be more reactive.
Right. And even if it has nothing to do with the spiritual side of things, in my experience, people who suffer from anxiety specifically have this viewpoint of, I can't handle what's happening because it's overwhelming. Everybody is overwhelming, and it seems like there is definitely a correlation between the people who suffer from anxiety and the people who sort of have this viewpoint. And I'm not saying that they are, that they equal each other necessarily, but it does seem like the people who I have experience with at the shop who come in going, I don't know how to guard myself, I don't know how to shield myself, blah blah blah. Those are also the people who have the anxiety that makes them question every single thing that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And, having that grounding meditation and giving up on other people's opinions of them and not trying to be special is one of the most helpful things, because there was one person recently that we had at one of our events that pulled this in a pretty public way. And to quote Colby, it's not cute. It's really not something that I think people should be proud of necessarily. I think embracing what you're feeling is great, but don't require other people to adjust what they're doing to suit the way that you feel. It's almost like people who have this, but I'm an empath viewpoint, they want to create a separation between themselves and everybody else. They're almost othering themselves in a way to where they want to be that person who just has to be catered to and fawned over, and, oh, are you receiving message for me? Is this for me? Or, blah, blah, blah. And it's not cohesive. You're forcing yourself up on a pedestal, and nobody wants to feel like you're looking down on them because you have these extra sensory perception that they don't.
So I have a history of severe anxiety. When I was in the earliest stages of my awakening, that's when I found Enchanted Earth. I was a tornado of energy. I am a natural amplifier, and whatever I'm feeling, I will send out in like 100-foot radius.
Yes, and I can attest
I'm
to
the
this.
nucleus of that.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to keep healthy and not. So in crisis, that does happen still.
Right.
I go to great lengths because of what I was taught. Because I had some badass witches take me under their wing. And first thing was, you have to learn how to ground and control your energy.
Right.
Learn how to be empathic.
Yes. So another thing, at least this is my opinion about it, is that people who assume this viewpoint of, but I'm an empath, are some of the most low responsibility people in regards to their energy. It's people who refuse to reel it in. And there's a time and a place for everything. We have seances at the shop, we have events at the shop, we have ritual at the shop. And if you go in it with a viewpoint of, oh, I'm the most empathic bitch here, chances are you're either going to get run out of the ritual, or we are going to put our big spiky coats on and you will not want to come back. Because those people tend to almost take the reins of whatever the event is and try to cater it to themselves because they want that attention. Don't get me wrong, I'm a Libra. I love attention, and I'm a Libra Virgo cusp, actually.
Right.
So I love me some attention. But there's a difference between getting all hot and going to the club and getting the attention that I want, and walking into a space that I'm unfamiliar with people that I'm unfamiliar with, and going, oh, this is my show now. And I feel like people who have that viewpoint sort of have that associated viewpoint where they want to come in and they want to make a scene.
Being empathic is beautiful. To not be empathic makes you a robot. But being empathic is beautiful because you are sensitive to energy. to be empathic, to be sensitive, to coexist with that element will also make you one of the most amazing lovers because you tune into that person's energy. You attune to one another and magic is created. There are beautiful sides to being empath. It is a double-edged sword as well.
For sure.
And learning what your negative triggers are, and instead of just talking about them and using those excuses, learning how to deal with it. I cannot control my energy when I drink. So I drink very rarely and in a comfortable atmosphere.
Right.
I have to go through personal processes when I know I'm going to go into large crowds.
Right.
I am very selective, I'm not going to lie, but I know how to handle myself. It's not my most favorite atmosphere, but I wear a grounding bracelet every day. And I will select my oils. I will select the crystals. I will shift myself. But I'm also not going to talk about all that I did in order to be able to do a thing.
Right.
Because nobody needs to know that. Nobody cares.
Right.
Unless they're specifically asking you, well, what do you do?
Right.
Then share it.
Sure.
But opening up a conversation with, you should know that I'm empathic, is an opener I could go the rest of my life without hearing.
Same.
And I say that all with total and absolute love, like for sure.
So, on the subject of grounding, I think it would be helpful for a lot of people who are new, that don't have experience with this, to talk about some of our grounding techniques.
Absolutely.
So, Colby and I both have this very similar viewpoint about stones for everyday use. And he just mentioned wearing a grounding bracelet. I wear a grounding bracelet, not every day, but when I'm in the shop for sure. I've got black tourmaline. I have a raw black tourmaline bracelet. I have a jet bracelet that I wear. I have a tourmalated quartz bracelet that I wear. I also have my witch's shield bag with me at all times. And listen to our Samhain episode if you don't know what a witch's shield is, because it's explained in detail.
Yes.
That I'll do even if I'm feeling extra ungrounded. Vetiver oil on the bottoms of your feet that's really good for grounding. Sticking your toes in the dirt is really good for grounding.
Get dirty.
Get dirty.
Over the years, I have found a combination of crystals that work really, really well for me. And I now have a second bracelet. The original one was lovingly gifted to a client who was having a moment. And that bracelet no longer became mine. That's a cute story. But the combination that works with me is lava rock, hematite, garnet, and black obsidian. You can even throw in some pyrite in there too. It's a combination of evenness and grounding.
Sure.
It allows me to do what I need to do, allows me to find my center more easily. Today, I also was wearing my black onyx pendant, which is my go-to when I know I'm going to have a baller day. I will wear that beast, either that or my labradorite.
Right.
But today, I also felt compelled to put my hematite on, my hematite pendant, which I realize now that is still around my neck. It's just what's needed right now. It helps keep you grounded, to be in the physical body, to be aware, to be present, to feel as though you have solid footing for that moment. You talk about sticking your feet in the dirt. When the weather permits, I walk around barefoot, incorporating rooted vegetables into your diet. Google that if you don't know what rooted vegetables are. And also tobacco. Tobacco is a grounding herb. I smoke.
So do I.
It is what it is. You don't have to condone it. You don't have to do it. But the fact is that tobacco is extremely grounding. Everyone is going to have their own techniques. What frustrates me, even though it's really none of my business at the end of the day, is people who consciously choose not to ground because they think it shuts them down.
Right. And I had that viewpoint when I first really started getting into my clair abilities. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't think that it would, I didn't think that it would inhibit me necessarily. I didn't know.
Right.
And you were the first person that I asked about that, was how is it that grounding, bringing yourself back to the physical body, allows you to open up more?
To have an established foundation and to be rooted and to have and literally have that earth connection in some way, shape, or form allows you to more successfully ascend into the higher self in a healthy fashion that brings greater clarity and understanding, because part of you is still here in the physical and rooted in reality. And that higher self that's coming up is still connected. So you're filtering esoteric message more clearly because you are centered.
Right. Makes sense.
Boom shakalaka.
Yep.
Bringing it back.
Yep.
So ground, y'all. If you don't still understand the different elements of grounding, Google it.
And that's a great segue, actually, into our tactical and practical segment here at the very end, where you and I have talked about before, where Google is and is not your friend when it comes to witchcraft. So I am a technology baby, for sure.
And I'm just a man baby.
It's true. When you start out, if you have no idea of correlations, numerology, animal messages, tarot messages, anything, one of the easiest places to start is to just Google it. Google what the meaning of seeing a blue jay is. In my experience, I don't ever just leave it at that. I always follow the thread a little bit deeper, and it can take some time to sort of establish what the difference is between that blue jay and that blue jay. And a lot of that is your own perception on things, and you really just have to pay attention to the way that you feel, if it's positive, negative, or neutral. These are all things that you can sort of consider when you're looking at whatever correspondence that you're dealing with. So I use Google all the time. It's definitely not my end all be all. I constantly am doing research. I love researching. It's my favorite thing to do, is to buy books and read books and read and amass this huge amount of knowledge.
Right.
But there's a difference between knowing it and applying it.
Google internet research is part of modern witchcraft now. If it wasn't for Google, I would never have taken a second look at the Everyday Tarot and Biddy Tarot. That's BIDDY Tarot.com. And doing that Tarot 365 that I do. I put down my perception or thoughts on the card, and then the thoughts of the author of that particular deck, and then the universal meaning. And I started the process of Googling the universal meaning of the Nine of Cups. And I found myself going back over and over again to biddytarot.com. And then I discovered this is the person that created the Everyday Tarot. And I don't have the author's name right in front of me. It's Bridget something. I'm a horrible witch that way. But because of discovering her through Google and really resonating with what she was saying, it encouraged me to buy this tarot deck, which is a deck, since I got it a month ago, I've been using practically every day.
Mm-hmm.
TheCrystalVault.com
Right.
is a very good reference for crystals if you don't have your crystal book. Herbal Riot, which is a Tumblr page of all things, I use Herbal Riot more than any book on herbs that I have.
Right.
Because of the information. They just hit every single point when it comes to merds, herbs, and their magical and medicinal uses. They are brilliant. That is Herbal Riot on Tumblr. So just to kind of wrap things up for the night, when we're taking a look at witchcraft and the different families of witchcraft, and that's a tree that really branches out in so many different ways.
Oh, yeah.
We're really in this era where we're seeing more and more eclectic witches. And I think that's partly because of the popularity of solidarity or solitary witchcraft.
Right.
For many, that's all they have is to be solitary. And when working as a solitary witch, you're kind of pulling from all these different pools. And, that can get sticky with the cultural appropriation.
For sure.
One of the reasons why I want to talk about this is I myself identify as eclectic. As eclectic as the day is long.
As am I.
And one of the main tools I use in divination and also in my clairvoyancy is animal medicine, which is popularly recognizable with shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a shaman. I also never seeked out to do animal medicine. It is something that manifested for me. One day you just start seeing animals and you got to figure it out.
Right.
And it led me down the rabbit hole of animal medicine. And now I work with Wild Unknown Spirit Animal Oracle, as do you.
Yes.
There are other animal-themed tarot and oracle decks out there that really resonate. You were working with the Crow Tarot.
Yeah.
And animal messages, animal medicine, animal totems, spirit animals, power animals, all of that. If you look, it's there.
Right.
In being eclectic, you never know what you're going to bump into.
Part of this I can actually attest to kind of personally recently is the Baba Yaga showing up.
Right.
And there is a lot to be said about pulling in aspects of other cultural paths. I know I also deal not super heavily, but I have an influence, kind of an undercurrent in my practice of hoodoo.
Right.
And root work and conjure and even Appalachian folk magic. There is not necessarily a fine line, but there's definitely a way to do things to where you're educating yourself. Where something is coming from. You understand the culture of where it's coming from. And you sort of take what is being taught and put your own spin on it. Because I know that's personally what I do with my practice is I'm very, very eclectic. I use a lot of, again, I would want to say shamanistic approaches to things. Mm-hmm. I deal with herbs a lot. I deal with fire and burning a lot. I deal with jars, sweetening jars, sour jars. I've bound, I've frozen, I've done a lot of different things from a lot of different paths, but also because I'm a researcher, I amass so much information that it's very easy for me to pluck out what seems like it resonates and sort of explore it from there. That I think is the biggest thing for me is it's important to me personally to when I invoke Ganesha, I want to know what Ganesha's story is. Mm-hmm. I want to know where he comes from and how he became who he is. And, it just, and I don't necessarily think that that's from a place of not wanting to be appropriative, although it is part of that. It's more that I want to know what I'm working with.
Right. Well, I was giggling because even in how I express myself magically. On Wednesday, I could be coming up into work in a sarong and my Ganesha t-shirt and totally being in that vibe, and then turn around and like today, I was dressed up like a wicked naughty pirate and feeling my fantasy.
Oh, yeah.
And feeling very, very magical in that more wicked way.
Yeah.
But earlier in the week, I'm like, oh, love, let's clear our energy. Let's Om Shanti Om Shanti Om Shanti Om.
My biggest advice for everybody, new or seasoned, practiced or unpracticed, is just realize that you do not have all the information. Nobody has all the information. Learn and read and research and don't fall into dogma.
What I have to say across the board on all topics tonight is really we should all just smoke weed and get the fuck over it.
I'm right there with you. Well, for most things, I feel like.
If we have stricken your interest once again and you want to know more about us, we are all over social media. For myself, you can find me at Colby333 on Instagram. You can find The Wondering Fool on Facebook. That's with an O, not an A. And of course, Hectic and Eclectic is on Instagram at Hectic and Eclectic Podcast. Now, where can they find us on Facebook?
So just search Hectic and Eclectic and it should come up. I think the full title is Hectic and Eclectic : a not so traditional witchy podcast. We also have an email address, which is hecticandeclectic@gmail.com. To end cap the episode today, I just wanted to give you guys sort of a rundown of what we're looking at for the next couple of episodes. I know one of the things that we really want to get into is the idea of karma in the Wiccan Read. Next episode is probably going to be more about what it's like to work in a brick and mortar shop. We're still working out the scheduling to see if our lovely owner, Kim Truitt, is going to be able to join us. We have some other plans in the works about sex and magic, LGBTQ and magic. What else do we have? We got lots of stuff in the works.
We do. And if I, in any way, shape, or form, have pushed a button with you tonight, have you taken offense because I said something wrong? Or did I just call you out? Mm-hmm. I love you. Yeah. I love you all.
Well, we hope that everybody has a magical week. We will be back again in 2 weeks. Like I said at the beginning, this is going to be a bi-weekly podcast right now.
Why is it got to be bi-weekly?
Because it can't be gay weekly.
Oh! Erd is gay.
So we hope that you've enjoyed. If you have any feedback at all, feel free to email us. We love hearing from you guys. Post on our Facebook, whatever it is that you need to do to get a hold of us. Have a good week, everybody. We will see you next time.
Peace out, witches.
Bye-bye.